powerful. Ayesha has dealt with nation builders, but her style of approaching them, Jinnah, remember, was one. Manto was another. I call him a nation builder too. Her style of writing is not one. Then there is the antiquarian forms of history writing. And we see enough of those where everything is carefully taken up, glories of Greece and Rome, and much detail poring over manuscripts. Every little figure in such an age is elevated to a major figure, and we sometimes have to struggle at universities with reading them for the purposes of history. But sometimes they are boring. I'm not saying the first two kinds of history writing are irrelevant. Then there's a third kind, critical history. And this is where Ayesha Jalal comes in. It is really an artificial construct. It isn't that it's not research oriented. It isn't that it's not something that deals with objective realities. It is that you have to, as Ayesha says, remember things and forget things, and put them together in a construct in such a way that you can speak about, as one of them, history is freedom, where the writing and description of power structures, a construct that moves over pages and pages of writing. You see the elements of the society move, you see a selection, you see some things forgotten, not because Ayesha can't remember them, she has a devastating memory. It's because she takes those pieces, she makes them into a mosaic, and then she's able to use them with consistency, objectivity, and truth to deploy an argument to show how we can move forward. So monumental history, not always, but yes, is about empire buildings and monarchs and big names and the history of games and I suppose critical history. There's a kind of, I hate to say it, she'll probably kill me for saying it, there's a democratic underpinning, an urge for society, for literate people, for writers, for thinkers, to organize themselves to understand the construct of how a society is viewed, not because viewing is enough, but a construct for how society can be changed. That is the essence of history and freedom. That's freedom. So, in our quest for history is freedom, this is not going to be just a theoretical abstract thing, and I will try not to rattle Ayesha as I speak to her, but I will concentrate all that while on the emergence of a major historian and writer of history and culture and so many allied fields in Pakistan, a discerning person. A lonely person only because there aren't institutions to be able to be created, transformed, and nourished by people like Ayesha. It's a solitary quest sometimes. It's incredible how her mind develops. I'm going to look at this aspect of her mind, her memory, her forgetting, and sometimes contradict her very gently. But more than that, I'm going to look at the emergence of Ayesha as Pakistan's foremost historian. Not because she writes about Pakistan only. Her canvas is huge. It's her perspective. It's her genetic origin. It's where her roots are. We're proud of those roots. Ayesha Jalal, welcome to LLF. Ayesha, can you start about how you, as a person, came upon the conscious concept of the writing of history and where you wanted to go with that history? Can you speak about that a little bit?
Well, as I've always said, history is a dialogue between the present and the past. And so I had questions about the present. I mean, you explained the three types of history that Nietzsche speaks about, but let me give a little background before I answer your question, covering a little bit of the things that you said. First of all, I mean, between the issue about remembering and forgetting, I mean, Nietzsche says in his wonderful piece written many years ago, 1893, uses of history, that, you know, it's possible to live without remembering, but it is impossible to live without forgetting. And so what does he mean? And in that context, he talks about the three types of history: the monumental, which celebrates, aims at acting and, I mean, doing something major national, maybe monumental histories are frequently national histories, and then of course the antiquarian history, which just preserves, and then the critical history, which is a product of feeling some degree of injustice, some oppression that you want to push against, that you want to question, that you want to understand. And so that is what critical history is. And it is history, I mean, it was precisely my sense of incongruity in a context that I happened to be in that led me to the question of why Pakistan was created. Because I was in a context where I was hearing a particular official narrative of where Pakistan, why Pakistan was created. And so I wanted to go and check my facts. I wanted to go and do the research. And so I went and did the research and was very fortunate at the level of my doctorate that the new British papers had opened up. You need a new swell of documentation to bring about groundbreaking work. Historians do not conjure up their own archives. They have to exist for them to write history.
But is there a perception there, Ayesha, maybe I've got it wrong, there's a perception that a sense of fair play, justice, has not been applied to what you're writing about, and it's now high time, we begin to understand the formative aspects of our genesis in South Asia as a nation.
Look, I mean, in all countries, most nation states have monumentalized their histories. There's nothing wrong with that. You can continue to celebrate. I mean, I think it's a very important collective endeavor for you to, for nations to celebrate their independence days and all their collective, remembrances together. But I also think that sometimes these weigh on you and prevent you from living the history of the present, which is of course always informed by the past, but to make a break and to make a difference and change. I mean, if you are content with your present, then maybe that makes sense. But if you are if you're discontent with your present, then you must have the ability to move beyond. You can't do that as simply sort of monumentalizing your history. You must ask why that monumentalized history does not deliver on many other scores for you, like your sense of identity, your sense of challenges in a modern, fast-changing world. These are the questions that you have to be able to have in order to really sort of relate to history. So what is monumental history doing other than to give an official narrative and the celebratory mode? Is it enabling you to be more equipped to meet the challenges of today?
But is monumental history also taking into account certain distorted critical faculties?
Absolutely. Monumental history simply erases. It simply silences entire awkward, it just erases those. That's what Buddy was speaking about, those erasures and silences in history which are part and parcel of every nation state's histories. So yes, those are there. But when a historian throws light on some of those silences and disrupts that, the composure, that's when that debate begins. And I mean, that's when you begin to move beyond that's
because we moved a little to the abstract. I'll try to move a little way and come to something which really happened in the last few years. Nobody, since we've never spoken of it, ever understood the genesis of the 70 years of Pakistan. It grew out of conversations with Ayesha on the phone while meeting her for lunch, and her insistence that materials be supplied, collated in a way, because this was not the writing of history. We were using a newspaper at dawn and its files, not to change things around or rewrite our perception of things, but actually to present things as they were viewed or allowed to be viewed at such a time. So when that happened, it was Ayesha, sometimes it's always Ayesha, who came up with a coherent picture of what we could look towards, who encouraged us, and sometimes over the telephone dictated complex pieces of historical narrative which had to deal with what we were going to. So this is an example of what has happened. It's not the creation of critical history, but it's the creation of documentation and the opening of archives so that critical historians would be able to function. Apart from you, Ayesha, do you see, and I don't want this to be only a partially honest answer for evoking optimism, do you see much signs of this critical faculty developing for the writing of history in Pakistan, given what is happening?
I mean, it's better than it was 10 years ago, but I can't see that I see a sudden surge of interest. There are a few, and there'll always be a handful who will emerge as historians. But I don't see a surge of critical thinking in this country that's going to bring about that sea change that you need in your social sciences and your humanities, a new way of thinking that will give this country the kind of vision it needs to take on the challenges more effectively and to move on into the future.
Ayesha, what worries me is nobody in this context mentions history textbooks. The kind of travesty historical textbooks have undergone in this country. It's a creation of a sham group of historians with a new historiography. I can't even use the word historiography towards it. It's an ideology which attempts to reassemble, juggle, and change the facts or the objective realities. When you are, as a historian, writing, you are writing, among others, to people who have some foundation of history and want to learn more about themselves, their past, your community, your sense of nationhood, your sense of regionalism. Does this textbook controversy not dilute or even damage the kind of process an objective critical historian like you is trying to work at?
Well, absolutely. I mean, but I don't think that there hasn't been enough of a noise about the textbooks in Pakistan. I do think that they are, and they have been criticized by a whole slew of scholars, including myself. And I do think that there is a recognition that what is being taught in schools is not history as a discipline, but history as ideology. And that does a great disservice to a people, to a nation, because they cannot then gauge what is wrong in their present in order to make a break and into something more effective, a future. So I do think that critical thinking is not really emerging from our educational system. Our educational systems are based on rote learning for the most part. So with rote learning, you can hardly have that creative, innovative thinking. I mean, there's an actual attempt at dictating notes, and then students just sort of write those notes in exams. Where is the creativity possible there?
Let me stop you there and ask you about the process. The reality is rote learning, and that is 80 to 90% of institutions. How do you move from a process of being subjected to rote learning when you are beginning to come to terms with history, and then move to understand history in a wider sense, in the way you describe? What is the kind of process you need to go to?
Well, you have to have a questioning mind. I remember doing an article on the history textbooks and finding an old history textbook that I bought, and a young girl's comment on that this was hell. Learning Pakistan studies was hell, was the comment on the book. So, the point is that even the students that I'm interacting with who are being subjected to these history textbooks, they are reacting. So that's the first moment of reaction, the rejection, the doubt. When you doubt, that is the beginning of a search, a quest towards something new. So you must doubt. You must be skeptical. But if you don't doubt, and because rote learning is intended to make you faithful, believers, dummies, and you have done a terrific job, Nisha.
The other question I want to ask you, Ayesha, was that history is sometimes written with respect to the recent past, and history is written with respect to the passage of the past few centuries. One of our Achilles' heels in the writing of history in Pakistan is how we see Muslim rule in South Asia. Of course, it would be fair to point out that many Indians see Muslim rule from a communalist perspective as well. It's not just us who are communalist. But despite that, what are the problems with respect to chroniclers of history in the past and in the present as a problem which faces the writers of critical history?
Well, Muslim chroniclers, for whom we have to rely upon to do medieval Muslim history, were basically patronized. They were commissioned to do their chronicles. So naturally, they were court historians. And you can imagine what that meant. But the point is, the major issue for our retrieval of our Muslim history, or even to have a judicious attitude towards it, a stance towards it, has to deal with the colonial modifications that emerge and how we have imbibed those. So I would just like to highlight one very major aspect, that in the chronicle age, I mean in the medieval era, when chroniclers wrote histories, they frequently had multiple temporalities. So for instance, you could go back to Genesis, you could go back to a regnal period, you could go back to universal history. You could do a variety of temporalities. What colonialism did, and that particular period did, was to make us very singular in our temporalities and reduce us in our thinking. So as a people, we had become reductive, derivative, unauthentic. I mean, even if authenticity can be questioned even as a possibility, but we are just not original and innovative enough in our own right. We're alienated people. Our people are cut off from their heritage, their historical heritage. They've imbibed new things, but it's not organic. And when you do not have that organic growth, you cannot become innovative, creative people. That is what is problematic.
Yeah, but how is this going to change?
By changing the educational system, which is a political question, and that is not for me to answer. It is for you people to find out. It is a political question. You have chosen to have an education system in this country which does not serve your purposes, does not serve your children, does not make them competitive enough in the international global system.
The Lord helps those who help themselves. But one of the more negative aspects, or sadder aspects, from these lines and emergent conversation with Ayesha is, are we going to have to wait 30 years for another Ayesha Jalal? And how are we going to utilize her?
Oh no, there are going to be many more Ayesha Jalals and young men who are my students who are going to be taking over from me, but that's still not good enough. What you have to do is a systemic change in our educational system. What's happening in the world is, I mean, first of all, we don't have a competitive labor force, competitive globally that is. Then we are in a scenario of roboticization. The world is in the process of, many countries in the developed world are thinking of how to sort of retool their labor. What are we doing? I mean, we're doing nothing. And so the question is that with the roboticization of labor, Pakistan is going to be really in, I mean, it's going to be nowhere, actually, as far as I can see, in the manufacturing.
Ayesha, in a practical sense, which came first, the chicken or the egg, before we move towards that kind of writing of history and a massive rethinking and reforming the method in which education is conducted in this country, we have to look at more practical things. To some extent, we have to look at history textbooks. To some extent, we have to look at training history teachers.
One thing, one of the great problems with history in this country is that people seem to think that history is about the past. It's about the past. History is not just about the past. I mean, the past is present in your lives. How you consume and understand the past determines the sorts of questions you're asking today. So it is critically important for you to make sure that you have the right history, or at least the elasticity and flexibility of that history. What's a history with a single temporality, when your earlier successors had a myriad of temporalities? You are reductive. The problem of the modern world is reductive.
Well, till such time as we become more comfortable with Akbar's Deen-e-Ilahi and the clerical response to it in the Mughal period.
I mean, the awkwardness with identity, the question was coming up in the earlier period, is really a modern problem. It's only the modern nation state that insists on homogeneous citizenry, equal citizens. In the earlier modern period, these were multinational empires where difference or distinction was a reality, but difference was not imbued by intrinsic difference for all times to come, religious, ethnic, whatever you want to call it. This was done by the colonial state to better manage colonized peoples. But the post-colonial state has adopted it, made it its own, and it is your national passion.
Okay, you mentioned the colonial state, yet, for obvious reasons, in 1947, when Pakistan and India were separated, there was a common school of historiography relating to both, but as a result of partition, an Indian school of historiography began to develop in its nascent sense. And in Pakistan, this was snuffed out either due to seeing history as an ideological tool to be manipulated, or history as a residual of the power process. And history was not allowed to develop. I think the most transparent case is of the site at Bambor, near Karachi. Exciting things have been looked at in the case of Bambor today. They are the fact that there's maybe 15 feet of a Sasanian layer, and that Karachi site with Bambor might have been the most important port dealing with the African side and some parts of the western coast of India. But in those days, they saw it differently. They saw Bambor as, over a period of time, a growing bastion for early Islam, because Muhammad bin Qasim came to Sindh in 712. So, when Dr., I think his name was F.R. Khan, famous archaeologist, decided to dig at Bambor under what he believed was a grand mosque, or what became perhaps a grand mosque, although I think later in time in Zia Ul Haq's period, this was determined to absolutely be the grand mosque. He looked at the embarrassment of how historiography would confront a hostile regime, a hostile ideology. He had uncovered 5,000 lingams in the Grand Mosque of Bambor. And so what did he do? He meticulously made archaeological notes and buried it back. So that's where it lies, under what Naipaul was to describe as Zia Ul Haq's showpiece, the landing of Muslims in India. So how do we deal with that kind of thing? You are living Trump's America, you know how to deal with it, because you have the state of Texas, which makes its own history and evolution textbooks. So, being so close to the problem, even in America, and having Trump over there, do you see us as radically heading to anything different?
Different to what?
Different to what you're seeing, a kind of distortion of facts.
Well, I think Pakistan's situation ultimately is far worse, because I think that the pushback in America should be acknowledged and underlined. The pushback against the sort of politics that are being promoted by the current incumbent are being contested at multiple levels. I don't think that Pakistan has its own contestations, and I just don't think that history and history writing is a priority. But I do want to say that I'm not suggesting that you should all become historians, but you certainly need to understand history in order to know where you are today. And I must say that the official history, the textbook history, simply makes it impossible for our young generation to understand, or even to be able to say with confidence that 2 + 2 makes 4, because they say, well, 2 + 1, our textbook says makes 3. So when I've taught in Pakistan at Lungs, certainly, the students have said, well, why haven't we been taught this? This is not very controversial, but why were we not taught this? So there are these erasures, elisions, and so the students are completely uncompetitive. I can assure you that if we have a quiz as we walk out with Indian students and Pakistani history students, the Indian students will beat the Pakistani.
Ayesha, I'm going to be a little...
It's that bad. It's a desperate, dire straits.
I'm going to be a little elementary. I'm going to take you down 2 case studies of 2 books you've written. They're not the 2 most important books. I think they're very fine books. But they both deal with very separate periods of history. The first was The Sole Spokesman, who dealt with Jinnah. The second was the book on the Balakot uprising of Sayyid Ahmad Library, Jihad. So these 2 books, when you approach 2 different periods like this, in a way different from attempted critical historians in this region, what were the main problems you encountered conceptually, and how did you overcome them?
I mean, the first question for a historian is a good question. I mean, you need to have a good question. If your question is one, well, what happened in 1947? Well, it's going to be a very flat, boring history. So, I mean, as I keep telling my students, if you want to ask good questions for research, they should have some tension in them, so that you can write it better.
Is that why you've been accused of using the tools of irony and paradox over large historical narratives?
But I will say that my leading question for my PhD thesis was, how did a Pakistan come about which satisfied the interests of its main constituents so poorly? And that's a damn good question.
So would you speak about these two cases a little more? You said something about the sole spokesman. How about the jihad book?
Well, I mean, I think the sole spokesman work, it became clear to me as I was conceptualizing the work and reading more that what we had been presented as an interpretation of partition was primarily a religious explanation. And the more I studied that, and the more I realized that the problem was really federal, and that this was about federalism and a federal solution that could not be found, I then began to recognize the importance of regional issues with the center. And center regional issues were markedly, in my view, a decisive factor in the actual partition, because you recognize the fact that in 1947 what happened was not that all Muslims of the subcontinent became citizens of the much wanted homeland for India's Muslims, Pakistan. When Pakistan was created, there were about one Muslim in every there were about there were 100 million Indians and Muslims were about 65 million. 100 million Muslims, 65 became citizens of Pakistan, 45 million were citizens of East Bengal, the largest largest Muslim state, but then leaving behind in India so many as well. So it was a very curious solution. It was not a religious solution. It was actually done on the basis of regional realities. But the entire narrative and explanation in Pakistan is about religion and the Hindu difference or whatever. But you ignore the fact that there are regional variations, and so there's a need to sort of make the operative federalism work. But we keep sort of forgetting about federalism and going to some kind of a religious issue or some social paradox. But I do think that Pakistan's problems are federal. They always have been. The great constitutionalist, architect, founder of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was a constitutional genius. He won Pakistan on a constitutional case. So I think that to forget that this is a federal country has been one of the benightedness of our political thought. We keep trying to pretend that we are some kind of I don't want to name names or say things, but we try to become holier than thou when our realities are what they are. So this refusal to even recognize or diagnose Pakistan's problems is leading us to the wrong policies and therefore the wrong results.
Well, minor paradox. You're a critical historian, you believe in critical writing. You have been an historian of many things in South Asia. You are also known, I say this delicately because I don't wish to provoke you, you're also known for views that advocate a strong federalism as long as they understand regional differences. But for the operation and governance that we need today, you have often spoken about the need for a progressive federalist state. Now, you have to deal with the here and now as a critical historian. It's the 1950s, and as a result of the dump charades taking place in Government House in Karachi, as a result of seeing several governments change and turn over, in the preparation for the coming martial law, a one unit is declared, where Sindh, Punjab, frontier, and the territory of Balochistan are amalgamated to give a 50% weight against East Bengal, which is East Pakistan. Now, as a historian of South Asia, writing on the one unit period and the emergence of one unit, analyzing the damage it did, despite your knowing that the reversion to provincial autonomy in some form in the recent past has been a disaster in terms of handling portfolios and performing governmental tasks. How would you begin to qualify and approach a subject like this, given your strong views
in terms of
historical writing?
Well, I mean, the fact is that in terms of what they did with the one-unit system, I mean, India was in the process of creating provinces, linguistic provinces, and Pakistan was doing the exact obverse. What I want to say to contextualize what you're really saying is that in this country, quite apart from an indecisiveness whether you want to be a democracy or a military authoritarian state, there has been an absolute confusion whether you want to be a centralized unitary system or whether you want to be a federal system. Now the fact is that you were created as a federal reality, but you have a very strong sentiment towards unitary centralized system. Now, until you resolve that, you're never going to get a constitutional system that's going to be stable. That's what civilized societies do. They come to compromises. You cannot compromise between federal and totally centralized, central unitary system. So you've got to sort of compromise there. Even on the democratic authoritarian aspects, you've got to make a compromise and make it viable.
Well, with Syed Hussain sitting in the front row, a great believer in the binary civic-military relations model, what I do want to ask you is, compromise with whom?
Well, I mean, I think, I'm not going to name people. Compromise with the powers that be. Because
I think we can apologize.
No, I mean, the powers that be who are in control at a particular time and configuration. I mean, those who are deprived. I mean, this is about power sharing. This is about moving together as a people. It's accommodation. It is not about sort of, treating people as if they are, somehow they're traitors. I mean, that's what happens here. So that leads to the kind of instability that Pakistan has experienced, which then justifies that centralized imposition that comes periodically, which then undermines our federalism further. And then we then go through this cycle. But effectively, you are a federation. And until you accept and live like a federation, you will continue to be extremely unstable as a state.
What worries me is, and this is not to provoke you, but what worries me is this: a country which broke in two in 1971 has not been able to write those critical histories you speak of with respect to something that was so important and so cathartic in our life. If we don't relook at even this basic fundamental chapter 40 or 50 years ago, how could we go forward? How many of us in this room, we probably represent a good part of the 10% of Lahore that's literate in such matters. How many of us have even bothered to read in detail the Hameed Haroon Commission report? I'm not saying it's a home story, but the point is we stopped pushing towards 1971 because it diametrically opposes the kind of ideological reconditioning through a very cheap kind of historiography. I think that Ziaul had excelled in this cheap kind of historiography. And the problem is not that democratic governments have had an alternative to this, it is that they haven't had the guts to be able to forge a systematic response to this. How do we deal with 1971? Is that a beginning in one sense for the writing of critical history with respect to this?
Yeah, I think attempts have been made, and I think I just want to sort of, without naming names, I remember there was a writer who came with a rather different sort of account about 71, which could be seen as quote-unquote Pakistan. And there was a lit fest in Karachi, and nobody went, or at least they did go, and then criticized her. So I'm saying that there is some degree of recognition that there's something that we have to do about 71. But there are very few people who are trained and equipped from the historical side to be able to do it. And then, you have to have documents, new materials to be able to do something with that. I would say that far more important, and in some ways more collective and perhaps even a little healing, would be some degree of, memorials, of the dead, and some recognition on the past of West Pakistanis of the excesses and misdeeds of the powers that be.